Okay.
Okay, so we'll pick up from where we left off last week. We had a very interesting discussion about that article that I mentioned with regard to uh, an event that we all share in which we take someone out and we go together and we pay. And it turns out that without exact change, there's a potential for a problem with rivets. We won't review the whole thing, but it was a fascinating discussion. In any event, so we're up to Ayin Bays Omid Bays, the Mishnah. And as I mentioned, this Mishnah will be recognizable because we have in the last months been sort of talking about different aspects of this Mishnah in the Gemaras that we've been learning. So now when we always kept referencing this Mishnah, that there's a Mishnah that says such and such. So now we're actually learning the Mishnah that talks primarily about how we deal with contracts for goods or whatever it is in the future without there being a fixed price. And if you put money down, then it's considered to be a loan. And then depending on what happens at the end, there could be ribis if the amount that's returned for that quote loan, the money, turns out to be not what was agreed upon. So if someone put down money and said, "I'll sell you 10 bushels of strawberries, and it'll be worth $100," and then by the time you make the repayment, it's worth $120. So now you're talking about a potential ribis issue, midrabanan, of course, but nevertheless, that's the gist of where we're going. And then there's some ancillary things the Mishnah will talk about, which we'll discuss. So let's start by saying, "Ein poskim ala peiros." You cannot enter into an agreement ala peiros, and peiros, of course, it means fruits or anything else. Atziyetze hashar. Now, remember that we said the shar was the established price in the marketplace that everybody agreed upon. So if you made an agreement before the shar, before the established price was in place, that's where you run into trouble because then it will fluctuate. If you have an established price and that's what it is, that takes away the ribis issue because you know exactly what you're dealing with. You're dealing with a fixed price, and that's the fixed price that you'll get back. So that's why he says that you can't do it until the shar, and the shar is usually not reached at the very beginning of the season, because in the beginning of the season, it's kind of like helter-skelter. How much produce is there? Who's got, will there be a big crop or small crop? So until all of that sort of filters through, you don't know what it is. So that means that you have to be very careful, because in an agrarian society, we don't necessarily deal with that, but in an agrarian society, that becomes a problem when people want to make deals before the shar is established. It says the Mishnah, Yotza Hashar, once the price is established, the main price in the main market, that we have to emphasize what we're talking about. We're talking about the main marketplace price. Like you have Machane Yehuda establishes the price, but the small little markets on the outside, they're sort of not, they have to go with the market. But once the main market establishes the price scheme, then you can enter into a deal for for in the future, a future deal. I guess we call that today futures, right? In the marketplace, we're calling it buying futures. Okay. Now, here's the point. The afa pisha ein lozeh. Even though, let's say the fellow with the who's going to bring the produce, the fruit, doesn't have it in stock. So, it's kind of like a loose situation because he doesn't have the produce. So what are we going to do if he doesn't have the produce? And he may have to go out and buy it in the marketplace for more money. And then we're going to have that same ribis problem circling back at us. Says the Mishnah, of a yesh lozeh, someone has it. So it's an interesting concept that as long as it's out there, if you don't have it, someone has it. So in theory, if you got the money, you could immediately go to that other person and buy it from him at the prevailing price, and that would be okay. So it's okay that you don't have it as long as it's out there and can be had. then the money that you're agreeing to can buy the produce at the agreed upon price. Okay, so that's the chiddush that Aploze Yesh Lozeh. And we say, and it'll come up in the discussion, that's what we refer to as yeshlo. That, in other words, the other way, if you have the produce, then it's okay. So
All right.
he's
So
saying
so
that
so
you
this really
don't
gets
physically
to
have it, you have it in potential. Go ahead.
so this really gets to seasonal issue. So
Right,
if it's a fruit that's already in season,
right.
then there's no problem. But if it's fruit that's very seasonal and nobody has it for another 2 weeks, then this would be a problem.
That'll be a problem.
But
Correct.
excuse me, Rabbi, why is this considered such a chiddush? It seems like it's obvious.
Why do you say
What
that?
now? What's the Mishnah say? Why would we think it wouldn't be this way? I mean, the fact that the Mishnah says it this way, we we don't need this. I mean, we
Well,
know that this is the logical way. You have if the stuff is not there, then obviously you're going to wait, and you bought it knowing that it wasn't there.
right, but this is the Mishnah. Remember, this is the Mishnah that's establishing the rule. Because you're asking a question, it's obvious. It's only obvious because we've established the rule that you have to have a established price. Otherwise, how would we know if the Mishnah didn't tell us? You've got to have an established price in order to be able to deal. Why would we know that? In other words, two people come together and said, "Look, I want to buy some things from you, and it's the first produce of the season, but I need it now." And he says, "Fine, so I'll sell it to you, and I'll have it, in a short period of time." It seems benign. It seems like two people are just entering into a deal. No one has the edge here. The Mishnah is giving us a chiddush and telling us, such a deal is ripe for a ribis issue in the future. It may not happen, but it is ripe for a ribis issue. How do you avoid the potential ribis? Jay, we don't know there's going to be a ribis problem later on. It could be
Right.
perfectly fine. So we're all dealing kind of mysteriously and foraging to what should the halacha be. So when you say it stands to reason, it only stands to reason because the Mishnah gives us the established principle of Yatza Hashar, that there is a prevailing price, an established price, and that's the price that you can rely on. So then all of a sudden, all of the ambiguity is cast away. There's no ambiguity. We know what the price is. That's the agreed upon price. When it comes time later on to actually transact the deal, because they haven't transacted yet, then we know what the parties are thinking because it was agreed upon already a month ago when the price was established. So we need this Mishnah to give us the chiddush that such a thing has a program by which you can establish and avoid ribis. And of course, the secondary phase was yeshlo. We said, forget about whether there's a price or not. If he's got it, then it's considered as if he's already transmitted it to the other fellow. In other words, let's say he has the product in place or the potential to get the product in place, and he hasn't yet delivered it. So the chiddush here is that it's as if he did already. And if he did and the price changed, it's changed in the hands of the recipient. There's no ribis because he's already owned it. So if the price changes later on and it was yesh low, then it's like I gave it to you already, Jay. You have it. If it increased in price, your benefit, not a ribis issue, but your benefit because you own it. You have it in place. So these are the chedushim of the Mishnah that we have to first sort of internalize, and then once we understand the chedushim, then we can say, "Oh yeah, that's pashut pshat." But you can't just say at the beginning, it stands to reason. Why? Why would it stand to reason? How would we know otherwise that this chiddush of Yatza Hashar is something that we need to consider?
So somewhat related, and maybe Stuart can confirm this. When I was in Israel, there was one shiur I was in. We were talking about it was Hilchos Brachos and talking about question of when you say a shechianu on a new fruit, and question came up about fruits that are available all the time, which we're totally used to here in the US versus not available all the time. And so I said, how about bananas? Because they're available all the time. Well, it turns out that in Israel, they're not, that apparently bananas, when they're grown in tropical climates, they are totally not seasonal. And that's what we're used in the US. They ship them from wherever, and we have it all the time. And it's always the same, 69 cents a pound year round. But in Israel, they grow them there and they're actually seasonal and they're not available all the time. And so, of course, then presumably the price would differ seasonally as well.
Right, right, right. So in there, in that kind of situation, if you're going to transact in bananas, then you at least have to have an established price
Right,
that
either an established price or that they're at least available somewhere
available.
around, even if you don't have them in hand.
Exactly, exactly. So those are the 2 points which we've been saying all these many months when we learn the Gemara, that those are the principles. And here, this is the Mishnah that pronounces the principles and tells us what the principles are. Okay, now, so now let's understand what we just said. Hoya Hoya hu tchila lakotrim. If he went to the very beginning of the kachim of those who were gathering or reaping the produce before the shar, then what do? I mean, does it mean you can't transact business? Period. I mean, commerce stops. Says the Mishnah, Poisik imo ala godish. You can enter into the godish is sort of the threshing floor. You can enter into into an agreement that for when you get in other words, on the threshing floor, what he has in stock, and you can agree that that's what you're going to get in the future. In other words, it's not a general purchase. You're going to him. He happens to have, I don't know, 100 bushels of grain threshed or whatever, and it's early in the season, but he needs it now. So commerce doesn't stop. So the chap here, says the Mishnah, is that even though there is no established price, you can enter into an agreement on specifically what he has on the threshing floor so that's more or less the Yeshlo concept, is because he's got something. It's not a price that everybody agreed on, but if you and I agree on the price that's there, then that's our agreement. We can agree. It may change later. Maybe I purchased too high or too low, but at least we have a specific product. That's the product that is going to be delivered later. I don't need it now, but I'm buying it now. So the Mishnah says that's an exception. You can do that as long as you have something in front of you, and that's really the Yeshlo concept, that he has it in front of him, so he can particularly buy it. Now, so now the Mishnah is going to give us several examples of this posik ala godish theory. V'hala ovid shel anovim. Now, what do? They take grapes, they put them into a vat, they let them ferment, and after a period of time, you have wine. But he didn't buy the wine; he doesn't have wine, but he buys the grapes that are in the barrels that are ripening. That's okay. That's okay because it's a specific thing, and he's going to buy that particular barrel. So the same thing with olives. I guess it's done the same way. You put them into a barrel and you let them sort of ferment until they become oil. And it's probably the process. And they used to do that also with clay when the fellow who was selling the clay for pottery, once he made the beitzin are the I guess the balls, the round balls of clay, and then they would deliver them later when they dried out or whatever. So it's the same concept as the grapes and the olives, but also v'hasid mishishku b'kipsha. and also sid is, I guess, cement or limestone that they would put into the ovens for future delivery. What
So,
are
so
really
I suspect in these cases, more than not just because of dry out, I think that all these cases, at least to my mind, and maybe I'm sure the Gemara talks about it, but maybe even Rashi talks about it, I don't know, is that grapes to be turned into wine, which was the main purpose of grapes, really, olives to turn into oil, but then this interesting was the clay and the seed, but the clay to be turned into powder. Presumably, each of these balls, whatever, would then be thrown on a
pottery
wheel, whatever, to turn into a cup or saucer or this or that.
into a pot, right?
Right. So all of these cases, what you have is produce or raw materials that's been partially processed.
Right,
And so no more raw materials are needed, but what's needed is labor.
right. And labor and time. So,
Right. Labor and time. Right.
so the Mishnah is telling us they all fall into the same category as quote yeshlo. In other words,
Right.
this concept, this extended concept of yeshlo, is we don't know what the price of wine is going to be later on. It may fluctuate. You're buying grapes in the early part of the
Right.
season.
Right. But the part that's going to fluctuate is the raw materials. The labor you could set as fixed cost
You could set a
easily
fixed
enough.
price.
So
Right, right.
presumably the idea is that you have the raw materials. So the raw materials we can now say since they've been acquired by the winemaker,
Tradesman,
the
yeah.
olive press, the potter, etc., that therefore now they can establish the price of the whole thing.
Right, right. So the other chiddush is that even without hashar, even without a established price, you're buying it in the early part of the season. But the fact that it's yeshlo has such a profound effect that it takes it out of the chashash ribbis. Now, now the Mishnah goes on and includes one other concept for which actually there's a machlokes. Posik imo ala zeva, and you can enter into a similar type of contract that we were just talking about on Zevel. Zevel is fertilizer. So l'chayra, why not? I mean, fertilizer should be, why isn't it not like Sid, or why is it not like one of the others? So that's that. Okay, so the Mishnah says that you could do that. Kol Yemos Hashana, all year. In other words, it isn't a specific time because there's plenty of supply, because it's an ongoing product that's made by animals, right? So therefore, the concept of yeshlo, even though he doesn't have it, but it's always gettable. In other words, on a moment or a day's notice, whatever, it's gettable, and therefore it falls into the same category. That's the Tanakama of the Mishnah, and he includes it in that category. Comes Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Yossi says, "Ein poskim ala zevel." You cannot enter into a contract for zevel, for fertilizer, in the same way we've been talking about entering into all these contracts. And the imkain hoislo zevel ba'ashpa, unless he had it already in his possession. Ashpa means in his a pile or heap. So in other words, Rabbi Yossi is saying just because it's gettable doesn't mean you have it. So here he is departing from the general principle, because the chayra zevel should be an easy one, right? Because like the Tanakhama says, it's gettable. So Rabbi Yossi says no, ein paiskel ala zevel, unless elim kenesh zevel ba'ashba, he had to already have it within him. Now, what is the reason? So according to our understanding, Rabbi Yossi says that most people, remember, in an agrarian society, everybody is out there planting. So he said it's not so gettable as you think, because everybody who has access to Zevel uses the Zevel for himself. In other words, he needs it. I need it. I'm planting. I need to have fertilizer. So it's plentiful, but not necessarily gettable. Says Rabbi Yossi, unless you have it, It's not yeshlo. It's not like the same concept. Oh, I can get it anytime. He's arguing on the Tanakama, and he's saying that it's not as gettable as you think because it's a highly sought after product, and even though it's in constant sort of manufacture, if you will, it's nevertheless something that you actually have to have physically, and you can't rely on the concept that it'll always be there for you. So it's a very interesting machlokes, I guess, in those days. Today, maybe it may not be so much of an issue because there are big companies that are constantly supplying manure and all that for farmers. But apparently, in those days, these were competing interests as to whether or not there would be enough zevel on the marketplace because everybody's using it. So that's a machlokes. But chachamim matirim, but the chachamim, in other words, generally they held like Rabbi Yossi. Well, they disputed Rabbi Yossi, but they held from the fact that it was so gettable that the concept of yeshlo applies. But that's a machlokes. It's not so simple like olives or grapes or everything else, where the fact that it's there but not yet in its form, that's enough. Here, the machlokes is whether or not, in fact, you can use the concept of yeshlo and says there is a yeshlo. So that's the machlokes. And the chachamim or the rabbim, so we hold like the chachamim that it's in such plentiful supply that you'll somehow always be able to get, even though it's a highly sought after commodity. Now, here's another twist. So, okay, people enter into a contract, and they say, okay, this is the contract, and this is what it'll be. But uposikimo b'shar hagavoa, we keep talking about price increases. And the way to establish a price so that the increase shouldn't become ribis is by the shar. Once you agree to the shar, it doesn't matter what happens later on because you already had an established price, and you're not going to be caught into a ribis situation if the price goes up. What about if the price goes down? Okay, we've been only talking about one way. What happens if the price goes down? Then then it's the shoes on the other foot. Shoes on the other foot. What do you do? So it says the Mishnah, Gova, you know how you go to a store and you buy something, and it's highly competitive. So the store tells you that if within 30 days you find this product somewhere else, we'll give you the difference, or twice the difference, or whatever the advertisement is. So in other words, they want to capture you by telling you, don't worry about a price drop. We're not going to hold you to the price if the price changes in your favor. And that's what this is. So the posukimo b'shar hagavoa, that you can agree that if the price drops, you'll get the better price when you actually get the produce. So in other words, by making that agreement, you're avoiding the ribis problem because you're saying we have an agreement. The agreement is it's the best price at the time I get it. So the fact that there is a difference in price between now and then doesn't serve as a problem because we've already agreed that the price will be what in my favor. Rabbi Yehuda Omar comes Rabbi Yehuda and he says, even if he didn't agree with him, let's say they didn't enter into this agreement that whatever the price is, I'll give you the best price 30 days from now. So according to what we just said in the Mishnah of the Tanakama, have to have an agreement. Says Rabbi Yehuda, you don't have to have an agreement. Now listen to why you don't have to have an agreement, because it's a little bit controversial. Why? Yochaloimar, the person who would be disadvantaged by the higher price can say, in other words, the buyer, tenli bazeh, either give me this new price, this good price, oh, tenli esma osai, give me my money and I'll go home. Remember There's no kinyan here. When you and I enter a deal, then well, yes, I've given you the money, you have the money, and now we're waiting for the produce. But where's the kinyan? Kinyan has to be, let's say, in goods, it has to be a kinyan, a mashicha or a hagbah or something. Was there a kinyan? There was no kinyan. So if there wasn't a kinyan, the deal was never consummated. So he can sort of threaten him and say, you got to give me the better price or I walk. I'll find someone else who'll give me the better price because we didn't make a kinyan. So that's the reason Rabbi Yehuda says that it's not set in stone yet, and therefore anytime the price changes. This is not,
But he gave him the
there's a
money.
is here. Not everybody
Didn't
agrees. Some
didn't
people, there's a cheshbon here that the exchange of money already sets the deal, even if Hagbal wasn't made or Mashiach wasn't made, because you exchanged money. And even though money isn't one of the ways to make a kinyan, we know that money doesn't make the kinyan. Like, for instance, when you sell chametz and you give the rabbi a $20 bill or whatever, you still have to make a hagbah. You still have to make a kinyan. The money itself didn't do it. But the answer is that the money already has sort of the symbolism of a deal. So it's not so simple to say, oh, we made a deal, now we come back out of the deal. That's kind of the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Tanna Kama as to whether or not you need an actual kinyan, like Rabbi Yehuda says, or whether the money itself can act as a form of kinyan. Yeah, Jay.
so but the money did exchange.
Yes.
So when you put money in tzedakah, it's not something you can take back out,
No, no,
right?
understood.
I mean,
Understood. But
so
in
when he
commerce, again, we're talking about pi halacha. We're not talking about,
right,
where the halacha says, you know how you consummate a deal, you make a kinyan. All right. So we have this concept in Jewish life and Jewish law, you have to have a kinyan. If you didn't make a kinyan, arguably you don't have a deal. Yes, you paid the money and you
but he
have,
has to give the money back.
yeah, right. But that's the threat that he's making here. Rabbi Yehuda says you don't have to have agreed that I'll get the best price because I can walk. So I always have it over you that you have to give me the best price. Otherwise, I'll get it from somebody else. And I don't want to lose a deal. I'll give it to you at the lower price because I don't want to lose a deal. Right. But Rabbi Yehuda says that the mere fact that the kinyan wasn't made is what he holds over his head to say, you've got to give me the better price because I can walk. That's his chiddush. But you're right, in commerce, and again, though the Manda Omrim who say you don't need the actual Mashiach itself or Agor itself, this is a question of Mekach and Memker, and we're always concerned about the marketplace. It's amazing how we have halachas, but we have this, and we talked about this a long time ago, that even though the halachas are clear on what you can and can't do, this overarching theory that the Chachamim at the time understood that the marketplace has to be honored. Otherwise, commerce stops. If people are going to make all kinds of shtiklach, right? Oh, I didn't do this. You can't hold me for this. Then all of a sudden, there's going to be no honesty in the marketplace because everybody's going to sort of pull strings. So we have to be sensitive to that. And I think
But
that's,
but in this case, when he gave the money
yeah,
and he still didn't make the Kenyan,
right.
if the price goes the other way,
Yes.
then the seller will say, "Look, I know you didn't make a Kenyan, so the deal is off. I'll give you your money back, and I'm not going to give you something that rose 10% in the marketplace for the price that you paid before." So is that like symmetrical? You have to look at both sides of
No,
what.
but you see, that's a very good point that you're asking. But the Mishnah seems to tell us that it's a one-way street. This discussion works only when there's a price drop, not a price increase. Because with a price increase, we're worried about a whole different set of facts. So therefore, there we say that it's established, and you can't not yeah, notwithstanding your point, right? That we didn't make a kinyan, but we have an agreement, and sort of the ribis issue takes front and center. But where the ribbis issue doesn't take front and center, then we make this argument that there wasn't a Kenyan, or maybe there wasn't a Kenyan, and therefore the whole transaction didn't happen. But yeah, it's an interesting question because l'chayra it should work both ways, but from what we understand from the Mishnah, it does not apply that way, and therefore there's a different set of opinions. Now, um, so
But if the market price went up, the one who has the stuffs, the farmer that has all the stuff, he's going to say, look, you pay me the market price. And the person says, no, we had a deal at a lower price.
right,
Then what happens?
right.
I mean, is there ribis there if he has to pay the higher price? Is in fact the owner making
But
some
that's not really
ribis?
ribbis. You see, that's not really ribbis because now the shoe's on the other foot. The ribbis, let's think about this. The ribbis in the first case is because um, he loaned him. Remember, the money that was given in advance is considered a loan. That's what triggers this whole question because he
Right.
gave him money and he can use that money. So it's a loan. And the loan is only paid back, so to speak, when the produce is exchanged. Then the loan is off. So if the price increases, then it looks like he is paying him more for that
Mhm.
loan than he would otherwise
Yeah, yeah.
had agreed. But if the value of the money goes down, then the person who's making the loan, you can't say there's a ribis problem in reverse because who borrowed the money, the person who borrowed the money is being disadvantaged, not advantaged. So if you're being disadvantaged, that's not ribis. In other words, there can't be ribis when it's against me and I have to make up the difference. That's not ribis. Ribis
Why
is
doesn't the
when
the
I'm
owner?
benefiting from the loan. If I'm benefiting from the loan, that's ribis. If I'm not benefiting, but if I'm losing from the loan, you can't attribute a ribis concept to someone not who is not making money. He's losing money. That you can't say.
But the owner is making money.
Well, the owner is making money, but that's not ribis because it's the person who got the loan. You have to focus on the guy who got the loan, not the other guy. The guy who got the loan, he's the one where there is a potential ribis issue. And that ribis issue is if it's an increase in price, he's made more money. But but if you lose money, there's never ribis when you lose money. We don't say that there's a ribis problem when you're
No,
losing
I
money. In this
understand
particular
that.
case, he'd be losing money, but for the fact that depending on who you follow, that he can argue that I can back out of the deal, and therefore you have to give me the real price. And again, the real price is what we were always striving to find. So if the price had gone down, then that's the machlokes here. That's what Yehuda is saying. You can do it all the time. All right. In any event, this Mishnah sets the stage now for this whole discussion of Yetzer Hashar and Yeshlo. So now we're going to get into a discussion on some of these cases. Okay. So now, what do we say the shar was? The shar was the price, the common price. And you have to sort of reach a consensus. There could be a lot of markets, right? There's market A, market B, market C. Which market are we going by? So typically, we will say that we're going with quote unquote, I don't know what this means, the main market. What's the main market? The market that everybody can sort of say, yeah, this is what the price should be. Amar Avasi and Rabbi Yochanan. Avasi said in the name of Yochanan, in Poskim ala Sharb Shabishuk, very interesting. You cannot enter into an agreement, a contract on the basis of the shar of the shuk of the marketplace. So the benign statement. What does he mean? What does he say? This is the statement he made. A paiskim al shar b'shuk. You can't enter into a contract based on the shar on the price of the marketplace. What does that mean? Amar Rab Zera lo Rav Asi. So Rab Zera said to Rav Asi, Amar Rab Yochanan, Afilu Kedromus Hazeh. Did Rabbi Yochanan, who was the Gadol Oyer, when he made the comment that you go to the marketplace, did he say that even the Dromos Oyer, the Machane Yehuda of Yerushalayim, that's not a marketplace? In other words, what is the marketplace? So you're going to have to say something is the marketplace. So when you say Shar Shebeshuk, what are you referring to when you refer to the marketplace? You're talking about a random marketplace or a particular marketplace. So the Gemara wants to pin down what we're talking about so that we have a frame of reference when we talk about this. So he asks the question, did Rav Asi said on Rabbi Yochanan, did Rabbi Yochanan mean to say that even if you go to the main marketplace of the city, you can't, that's not a shar? That you can't rely on that because that's not a established price. So the Gemara says, Amalei, so he said to him, Lo, Amar Rabbi Yochanan ele b'shuk shel hayoros. All right, so this is how we define it. That Rabbi Yochanan was only saying that you can't go by the shuk of the towns, meaning the surrounding towns. Let's say Bet Shemesh, Ramot Bet Shemesh. They had a marketplace, right? Modi'in. Everybody had a marketplace.
Yeah.
Are those the marketplaces? So he's saying no, those are not the marketplaces. Rabbi Yochanan is saying that he's excluding the shuk shel hayoros, the low kavi shavayu, who don't have established prices. So, for instance, if I go to my local grocer, and my local grocer has a beautiful array of fruits and vegetables, and I go and I say, "Oh, I want to buy some tomatoes. I want to buy this. I want to buy that," and I look at the prices, and I see the prices. I think to myself, "Wait a minute, those are not the prices that I saw in the big and beautiful giant that we have down the street. Why should I pay 89 cents, as Menashe said, 89 cents for bananas when I can get them for 69 cents?" So the teretz is that what he's referring to is the giant. He's talking about the giant, that the giant is the established marketplace, and that's what we go by. But when he says that you can't go by the Shar Shebeshuk, he's referring to the local marketplaces, the corner store, or the store in a small outlying town where typically you don't have the best price. Now, sometimes local is better because it's fresher and nicer, and it was picked this morning, not 2 days ago, and therefore the prices are higher because the overhead is higher. That's understandable, and people are willing to pay for that, but that's not what's called shar. That's not what's called the prevailing price, because let's just say that the Hamonam, most of the people know that if they go to the giant, they can get it for 69. So they're not willing to pay 89, even though it might, I don't know, is it better, is it not better? But when they see the price, they immediately realize this is not the best price. So again, the Gemara wants to establish clearly what we mean by hashar, and that this is the establishment, that it's the agreed upon market that everybody will say, this is the market that we are measuring everything else against. And if I go to a little guy and I say, you want 89, I can get it from the giant for 69, he has a choice. He can say, I'll sell it to you for 69, or go to the giant. I have something a bit or different. But at least there is a price that one can say objectively, this is the best price, and this is the price we should go by. All right, so we wanted to just clear that up and as to what it is. Now, so based on this, Frek the Gemara, Lamanda Salakadatami Karo. So now, what was the Havamina? The Havamina was that potentially the main market also was not an established price. If he asked that question, again, let's just break it down. He asked the question, you said a paiskim al-shar shebeshuk. You can't make an agreement based on the shar of the shuk. So we had to have the discussion to say that he didn't mean the dromus, the central market. The Havamina was even the central market, you can't enter into a deal. I mean, plainly speaking, when someone says you can't enter into the shuk and you don't know anything else, what's a shuk? Shuk is a market. Any market you can't enter into an agreement. It sounds bizarre, but that's the way we would learn it.
People accept them, that
Yeah,
location as a market.
that's the market.
So how
Right.
can he say you can't go by that market?
Right. So what the Gemara is saying, what's the Havamina? Again,
Yeah.
we know the answer, but the Gemara oftentimes wants to go backwards and say, what was the Havamina when the question was asked?
Right.
The question was asked in Paiskin al Shasha B'Shuk. It means any market. You can't go by the price of the shuk. Big market, small market, main market, outlying market. You can't do it. So that's what he's saying. According to what we originally thought when we first heard that pronouncement by Ravasi and Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan, I feel the Kedroma says that. Even this big main market, you can't go by the shar, right? So, so what's the upshot? El Masnisin Diktani, the Mishnah that's teaching us in Paiskin ala Paris, Achayetza Hashar, that you can't make a deal on Paris until the shar is established. Yotza Hashar, Paiskin. Then you can. Frek the Gemara Hechem Mishkachas law. How in the heck are you ever going to have a case where you're going to know what the shar is?
Yeah.
If in the beginning you're thinking that no marketplace is the central marketplace for which the shar should be established, then you're chasing your tail because you say, oh, Yotza Hashar. But what does that mean, Yotza Hashar? Where's the shar? Where is it coming from? What market is it that's going to give us the shar? Again, we know the answer, but if you want to break it down to what the Havamina was, the Havamina was that there is no such marketplace. If there's no such marketplace, how do you come to a shar? What does the shar mean? You're telling me Yatsa Hashar, then everything is okay. Shar for what? Where? Eichem Mishkachos law. Where are you going to find the shar? So the Mishnah answers, and it tells us that Bechited Achlev Arve, that the Havamina was that we weren't even talking about a marketplace where you go to Machne Yehuda. We were talking about the silos that are out there on the farms that have all of this extra grain, or or what about the ships that bring in grain from overseas? That's what the marketplace is. That's where you have an established price. So the Havamina was that there's something better than the marketplace. It's food that isn't even out there yet. It's coming from overseas. It's in the silo. It's in the storehouse. So the answer is that that's what we would have thought would have been the shar. That
But that won't be the same day typically. If it's on a ship, it's going to take time to get it and unload it.
that's correct.
And it
That's
also
correct.
won't be the
Mm.
same price because there's always a
Right.
markup reasonably from wholesale to retail.
Right. So
So we don't know what the answer is price wise.
right. But
Just
that's
because there's choices of
right,
the routing, how it's going to get there,
right.
you're still up in the air. We still haven't gotten anywhere.
So what he's saying is the Hava Amina could have been that he's referring to food that isn't even here yet in the first place,
Yeah.
where that's going to be the price. Says the Mishnah, no, I'm not talking about future produce that's coming from overseas or from another source. I'm talking about what's in the marketplace. You can touch it, you can feel it, you go to it. So that's the chiddush of the Mishnah, that when we're saying the prevailing price in the market, we're talking about the actual market, not the future market that isn't here yet. Otherwise, how are you ever going to get your arms around
You're
to figure
stuck.
out what we're talking about? So again, the Havamina in understanding what the kasha is, what are we talking about? That you can't rely on the prevailing price of the shuk. If you can't rely on the prevailing price of the shuk, what can you rely on? Says the Mishnah, yes, you can rely on the main marketplace that everybody agrees that Machne Yehuda is the main marketplace, because the Havamina would have been that it's a marketplace that comes from somewhere else, which isn't even here right now. And so in order to negate that as the possible marketplace, the Mishnah is telling us, no, we're talking about the existing main marketplace that everybody agrees that that's the prevailing price of the market. Now, it's very interesting because if we were to fast forward to today, what is our main market price? If you were to ask the question, what's the main market price? Today, you have huge main markets that are competing for price. You don't have one price for the Giant and for the Safeway and for the, I don't know, Harris Teeter or all the dozens of other stores. And then you have Aldi who will undercut you for even, by 3 cents. So what is the shar? What is really the shar today when you have, Baruch Hashem, such an abundance and you have competition? Then there isn't one marketplace that will be the overarching marketplace for everybody else.
So I think
don't know the answer. I'm just positing the question.
So I think we have two different issues. One is a thing which we discussed months ago, I remember at length, which is this whole idea that if it's, I think it was 1/6, that if it's more than 1/6 under or over the quote established price. And so on that basis, so as long as Giant and Safeway and Harris Teeter and all these are all within 1/6 of each other, which generally they would be, everything in that range is considered kosher.
Marketplace.
But when it comes to ribis, we have this issue that you thought you were buying it for $1, and now this same guy is selling it to somebody else for 95 cents, even though it's a tiny amount that's more or less or whatever that's less than 1/6. But when it comes to a ribis issue, it can still come in.
Right. So you're talking about two different things, correct?
Two different things, and yet both can enter into any delayed market transaction.
Yeah. But again, the question of what is the established price once the price is established was easier said than it was easier said then than done, because there wasn't a Safeway, a Giant that were competing for the main marketplace price.
But if they had several markets, not like what you're saying today, but if there were competing markets, then you would also have to take into account which one is getting more traffic. If more people are going to this market, that should basically say that's the most popular and that's the one that we should use.
The other day I went to get gas. And I looked on 3 different corners of a major intersection. There were gas stations, and each one had a different price.
Right.
So I went to the one that was the lowest price. It was all, 4 cents a gallon less than the next one, but
But in that case, all 3 could have been owned by the same owner.
I've seen that sometimes.
They do that actually.
But you know that at the end of the day, the price of the gas is fixed, the taxes are fixed, the rent isn't fixed. If I'm in a high district area where I'm paying twice the rent that you're paying, then of course I have to charge more to cover my rent than you do. But the
price, so that's why gas is always more expensive in Bethesda than in Wheaton.
Than it is by exactly.
But when it's in literally the same block.
But Jay is right. It's probably the same owner. but it's the joke about the 2 guys who were sitting and selling their wares on the street, and one guy had a cross, and he was sitting and he was selling something for 50 cents, and the other guy was the Jewish guy was sitting there, and he doubled the price, and the guy, of course, they all came and they bought by the other guy. They say, "Don't you understand the supplies? Why would we ever come to you when we can go to the other guy?" So then he says, Yussel, he's going to tell us how we're going to do our business. So that's what it reminds me of, is that right, the secret is in the sauce. But my impression is that in the time of the Gemara, we didn't have Safeways and Giants and Harris Teeters. We didn't have the competition where one could say that the main market was different here than there. We had small markets, of course, in all the small towns, and we had a main market that everybody came to, Yerushalayim or Tel Aviv or whatever it happened to be, Yerushalayim at the time. So it's easier to understand the concept. Today, we want to extrapolate the concept, but today, as we said, we have a blessing, we have an abundance of everything, and therefore the main market, what is the main market? So, but anyway, I don't want to overthink this, but the fact of the matter remains is that from our standpoint, the Mishnah is giving us the chiddush that there is a main market and not what we would have thought, oh, stuff that comes from overseas and other places that can establish the market. No, the market, what's here today, and that's the main market. Now, all right. So again, it's an exercise in thinking about how the Mishnah approaches this and how we reach our conclusion that we're talking about a main market because we had to have a minute for something else. Okay. Now, what about a situation where there's more than one quality? In other words, you can buy better, and you can buy, you can buy Bainini, and then you can buy idiots. You can buy the better quality. So when the question arises, what is it that you're going to buy? Are you targeting to buy the best price, but not necessarily the best produce? Or you'll pay more, let's say, for something better. How do we look at that? Says the Gemara Tana Ravanan. In Paiskin ala Peiris, again, repeating the Mishnah. In Paiskin ala Peiris, Achi Yetza Hashar. Yetza Hashar, Paiskin. Afapi she'en lozeh, yesh lozeh. Okay, we just repeated the Mishnah. Fine, that's very good. That's how you approach it. Now, what about the following scenario? Ba'arba. The new chadoshes, the new produce that just came on the market, is selling for arba, meaning it means arba saw, 4 saw for a seller. That's the standard when we say arba. That's kind of the way standard. So for one seller, you get 4 saw of the produce. But if you buy a day old, right? Giant has day old stuff that they sell, everybody else. Then the shalosh, then I'll give you a better deal. And for a seller, it'll cost you a seller for 3. You don't have to pay extra.
That's I'm confused. If it's
Yeah,
four
no,
for
what does it mean?
is it 4 for seller, 3
No,
for
no, no,
sell
no,
would
no,
be better?
no. Sorry, the other way around. Yeshanos are the better. In other words, the fresher, we're going to see in a minute what the Gemara means. The fresher is
the better.
arba because it's still not settled. Okay, the Gemara is going to explain in a minute. Yeshanos, when you buy Yashan, right, you're buying better quality, right? Like we buy, when you buy Pas Yashan, it's a better quality.
Well, so that's not that's I was actually going to bring up the question of Yashan and Chodesh, because there you could argue that it's not only that you can eat I mean, they are more makpid. We're not, most of us aren't, so myself aren't so makpid about it here, but assuming you are, Yashan is not only might be better quality because it's had time to dry out, to ripen, whatever, but
right.
it's also halachically you can eat it now, whereas the chadash you might not be able to eat until Pesach.
That's right. That's right. So when he's referring to the 4 saw, he's referring to 4 saw of the freshest product, which is not yet really edible because it's still not dried out or thawed.
It's not fully ripe. Yeah, whatever it is.
Green
Right.
bananas.
I
Right,
love them. I love green bananas, by the way.
right, right.
And
Okay,
actually,
so but again, for our purposes, Yoshin Chodesh. So if for Chodesh you pay 4 sa'ah, and for the older
Porcelain.
product, the Yoshan is 3 sa'ah. 3 sa'ah. So now you have a choice. I can buy Chodesh, I can buy Yoshin. So says the Gemara, and Poiskim, uh, you can't make a deal for the Chodesh at Arba until the established price is made for both Yoshin and Chodesh. In other words, if the marketplace had not established a price for, let's say, the Chodesh, and you have Chodesh and Yoshan, so it's telling us that you have two prices. You can't enter into a future. You can buy today, but if you wanted to buy something for the future, you have to wait till Yotzar Shar. And the Gemara is telling us Yotzar Hashar means the Yotzar Hashar for both the Chodosh and the Yoshan. You have to wait to both, then you know what you're buying, and then you can pay the correct price. Now, um, okay, so that's one situation. There's another situation where, we have a halacha that when you have a field, you have to allow for leket, shikha, and peah. What is leket, shikha, and peah? Means that if you assemble the bushels and something falls out, you can't pick it up. Shikha means, oh, I forgot to go to that corner of the field. Forget about it. You missed it, you missed it. And peah is the corners, the actual corners that you don't go deep into the corner. You allow the corners to be not harvested so that the aniyim can get it. What happens? You have this very enterprising fellow who went out to the fields and he picked up the leket. He gathered the leket, and now he wants to sell the leket on the marketplace. Very smart, very good. He wants to make a few dollars. He's going to gather what fell through the process, and now he's going to go ahead and sell it. If the people collecting leket are selling for 4 saw per seller, l'chol odom mishalosh, and all of the owners, meaning the field owners, are selling 3 saw for a seller. So now you have competition between the owners of the field and the people and the aniyim collecting leket, who are now going to the marketplace and they want to make a buck, so they're willing to sell more for the same price to get a. In other words, people should buy for them. Says where it says ein poiskim, you can't enter in such a contract with either of them until there is an established price for the leket and the meicher. In other words, we're dealing again in a society where all these things are a little bit foreign to us. So we know that the leket shikha peah, and for someone to gather the leket, he has to live. So he takes the leket and he sells it. That's fairly normal. He sells the leket. What's he selling? He's selling sort of the leftover. Now, I'm not 100% sure that the leket is inferior to the produce of the original owner, because it's just stuff that slips through the cracks. It doesn't mean it's inferior, but as Rashi and others explain, he goes around to many fields. So he gets leket from my field, and leket from your field, and leket from Menashe's field, and he puts together a bundle of leket. But the leket isn't the same. My field and your field and Menashe's field are all different. Mine could be better than yours or not as good as yours. So when you're buying from the ani, from the fellow selling the leket, you're not necessarily buying. You're buying first quality, but it's a mixed bag. So you can't rely on saying, "Oh, I'm getting 100% of this particular grain." You're not getting that. You're getting a portion of this field, a portion of that field. So when the Gemara tells us here that there's a competition between the owner of a field, meaning uniform grain, or a someone who collects leket that's not uniform because he doesn't necessarily have enough from one field to sell a bundle from one field. So that's pshat what the Gemara says in that particular case. When you want to know what the product is, the shar is not the shar just of one type of product, it's the shar of everything. So you know, going out into the marketplace, you can buy discounted or you could buy, let's say, first rate. So that's what the Gemara is trying to give us an understanding of what it means to have a shar. And he says that the shar will depend, in one case, whether it's a moist product and hasn't dried, and another, and someone else has it dried, so you don't have a shar yet. Or if you have between an owner and a Lakota, someone who's collecting leket, you also don't have a shar until there's a one price for each one. In other words, everybody knows if you go to the owner, you pay three. You get three per seller, and if you go to the other guy, you get four per seller. Okay. So this is the brisa. This is Torah Rabbanan. And on the face of it, okay, I understand. Shar means shar for everything, not shar piecemeal. So, okay, that's all good. Rab Nachman, comes Rab Nachman, he says, Paiskin Aloikis B'Shar Aloiktas. I want to add an addendum to this price. You can't go out and buy in the marketplace until you know what the shar is for the leket product and for the regular product. I understand, because you have two different products. But Rav Nachman says you can go to the Loktais and buy what he's selling for his price. Why should I be prevented from going to the fellow who's collecting leket, and I'm going to make a deal with him for his future leket? I'm not interested in the main guy. I'm not interested in the owner of the field, what he has. What he has, he has. That's all good. I want to buy the leket product. What prevents me from going into a contract for the future produce of the leket guy? Okay, so he's saying that's a caveat, that's a PS to this brisa, that you can do that. Okay, so Rav Nachman wants to add a chiddush that the brisa is referring to competitive product between an owner and a baal leket, and I'm talking about exclusively a baal leket. So that's Rav Nachman's position. You can do that. Right? The Gemara, Rav Nachman. Rava says to Rav Nachman, Mashno locate. Why do you allow buying exclusively from a locate? The Ilesle Yosef Meloktes Habre. You know that if he doesn't have enough of his gleanings to make you a sale, then he can always get it from his fellow man. So basically, you have a yeshlo concept here, because there's enough people collecting leket that if I don't have enough leket to sell you 4 bushels, I'll get it from the next guy selling leket. I'll make a deal with him and I'll get his leket and I'll sell it to you. So if that's the case, Balabayas Nami Yosef Meloket, then why can't you go to the Balabayas?
Let him make
He
a
has a
mixture.
problem. If he has a problem, he'll also go to the Baal locate.
He'll make a mixture, a hybrid, whatever you call it.
What's that?
He'll go and get from the
That's exactly
leket
right.
people, so it won't be 100% perfect.
That's exactly right. So in other words, you
And
want to
he's not
say
gonna. He doesn't necessarily have to tell people that part of it came from the leket folk.
right. So
Well, that's a
basically,
question, maybe. Does he have to admit that it's a mixture, part of which came from leket people?
all right, but let's not jump ahead of ourselves. If Rav Nachman gave a PS and he said you can deal with the Baal locate for his produce because he can. Oh, and what's the reason? Because he can always get a leket. Then why are you preventing someone from buying from the original owner? If he needs to supplement, he'll supplement from the leket. In other words, if the havamina is that there's a yeshlo, that there is enough out there that well, you're saying you can't be Yatza Hashar because there was an established price for the two, but yet you can go to the locate because he can always get leket. Then go to the regular guy and buy from him. And if he has enough, fine. If he doesn't, he'll supplement so that there'll be enough produce there and you can establish the price based on what he wants to sell the good stuff for. So in other words, Rav is asking, Rav Nachman, why is your chiddush just for the locate? What you're saying that you're allowed to do is, in theory, that should work for everybody. We want to say that you can't do it because there is an established price for either one, therefore you can't buy either one. But if you can buy the one, and you're saying that that's okay, Rav Nachman, then you should buy the other two, and that should be okay too. So the kasha, the teretz, I mean, the kasha is a setup for the teretz, but and you hit it on the head, Jay, when you're saying, okay, but maybe, if you're going to go, is he going to go to the locate? Is he going to collect money for, is he going to try to deceive the guy? So Rav Nachman answers the reason why I focused on the locate and not on the other fellow is Balabayas Zila Bay Milsa Lamezit Velocate, because it's not going to pass. It's not going to be something that the regular balabos, the regular farmer, is going to want to go to a locate to supplement what he doesn't have. In other words, human nature being what it is, I have the pride of authorship. I have my particular grain. And if I'm running short, it's not going to pass for me to go to the locate and say, give me a few grains so that I can make my bushel. And it's going to be something less than what I have. That's human nature. He says, and people won't do that, which is why Reb Nachman focused only on the locate, because the guys collecting, I mean, for better or for worse, the guys collecting locate, they're poorer people. They're not going to be makbid. I get a half a bushel from Ruvain, a third of a bushel from Shimon, a quarter of a bushel from Levi, and then I present, here it is. Someone looking at it is going to see that they're not uniform, but he's going to be willing to buy it because it's all good grain, albeit not uniform. Okay, but when you're going to the established guy, right, Giant isn't selling knockoffs. They're selling the best of the produce. So it's not going to pass for them to say, we're selling the best of the produce, but we got caught short, so we'll buy some produce from the farmer out in, I don't know where, Frederick.
Only.
What's that?
I picked only.
Yeah.
Only. Yeah.
Right. So I'll buy a little bit from there and I'll put it together and it'll look okay. So he's saying human nature, it doesn't allow that. And therefore, a person wouldn't do that. Iboyas Ema, there's another teretz to the same question. Man de Yov Zusa the Balabayas. If someone gives money to the Balabayas for the future contract, a pair Shapira Yahid. So again, it's the same thing, but when I buy from you and I give you money because I know you're a respected seller of the best produce, I'm expecting the best produce.
Yeah.
I'm not expecting to be deceived that you're going to sell me, first and second quality. I want the first cut. So, but basically, it's the same answer in that there is a gulf, there's a gap between a regular seller and a locate, and someone who collects leket and sells. So Rav Nachman is willing to say that if you're dealing exclusively with the locate, you're not getting uniformity. So does it matter if I'm getting 2/3 from Ruvain or a half from Ruvain, or a quarter from Shimon or a third from Shimon? It doesn't matter because I'm already buying second quality.
Hybrid,
there, I'm willing to say that you don't need the shar because you can already deal with it. But once you're dealing with first quality, that has to be uniform. And if it's not uniform, then people won't buy. So again, we see that as a practical matter, the Gemara understood how people perceived the marketplace, and we had established rules as to how one should sell in Erlich, let's call it Erlich in the marketplace. We're not talking about people who will cheat, but to sell Erlich in the marketplace, it's kind of like a roadmap. What's considered a central market, what's considered shar, when can you do the shar? And again, it seems a little foreign to us because we're dealing in such a sophisticated marketplace today, especially when you go to the stock market and you buy futures and options and I mean, there's so many different things you can deal with today that it's kind of like a whirlwind. But in the time of the Gemara, it wasn't that sophisticated, and people, maybe it was a simpler life. So people would just go to the marketplace, they buy what they need, and they they wanted to buy. I have enough money to buy first-rate goods, or I don't have enough money, so I'll buy second-rate goods, but I know what I'm dealing with.
But
Anyway,
they
again,
still had the same chachma that we claim we have,
that's right.
if not better.
Right. They really understood. We really understood. All right. So next week we'll pick up on what the Mishnah is telling us, but it's really interesting how the Mishnah formulates this whole question of Yatzar Shah. And again, not new to us because we've been going through this again and again, but here it's concentrated in the Mishnah and how the Gemara explains what we're dealing with. So Mitzvah Shem, after our celebration of the 4th of July, we'll all be back next Sunday. And lots of Yale to you and to the symptom of the family. And we should have a good week. And Shalom Al Yisrael, we shouldn't have any casualties, and we should only have Hatzlacha Rabbah.